Hello and welcome to another video from the only channel that you need to not only survive the current apocalypse but actually enjoy it. And today's video is going to be about the spiritual nature of man, and closely related to that subject we'll be talking about the spiritual nature of the angels. There are many religious beliefs as to what happens to a person after they die, and even beliefs about what a person experiences before they are born. I have never made a video that clearly defines those things because I have never really looked into it enough to speak with any authority on the matter. For the most part, I've always just figured that none of us existed before we were born, and that after we die, we don't exist again until after the resurrection takes place. But I have come to realize that my personal beliefs may have been somewhat tainted by past religious beliefs, making them inaccurate. The only thing that differentiates a person seeking truth from someone not seeking truth is a willingness to give up strongly held beliefs once those beliefs are revealed to be lies. It's a difficult thing, but I am trying. I hope that you will do the same. Quite a few questions about this subject have come up since I started making Bible-based videos, causing me to think about these things whenever I'm reading the Bible. For the last few months, every time that I have read a scripture that seems to be about our soul or spirit, or about our interaction with angels, life before our birth, or life after death, I make a note of it. And this video is a result of all them notes. I think that this question actually needs to be answered clearly and directly from the scriptures. Over the course of my life, I have had many different religious beliefs about this subject, but none of those beliefs were ever directly from the Bible. Instead, most of what I have always just taken for granted were the beliefs shared with me by individuals or as defined by some religious doctrine. As a child, my father told me that I had a soul, and that when I died, my soul would go to heaven. The entire concept sounded rather preposterous to me, and having never seen a soul go to heaven, I have to admit that I had my doubts. Something else that didn't sit well with me at the time was the understanding that my father had never seen a soul go to heaven either. At the time, I believed that my father would never intentionally lie to me, but I had to wonder if perhaps someone might have lied to him. As I got older, my father's teaching about the nature of the immortal soul became even less believable, as I discovered that when it came to matters concerning the spirit world, my father was actually a habitual liar. In the course of a single day, I discovered that the Tooth Fairy wasn't real, the Easter Bunny wasn't real, and even Santa Claus wasn't real. And my father, having discovered for himself that none of those false gods were real years earlier, still thought that it was a good idea to convince me that they were. However, as time went on, I became very religious and was actually able to develop some very strong beliefs regarding where we come from and where we are going. But as strong as those beliefs were, I never was able to convince myself that my beliefs were absolute. I had contact with so many people involved in so many belief systems that it made me unsteady in my faith. Thank goodness. Just like everyone else, I have an imagination, and I spend time trying to figure out all of the mysteries of the universe. But as a human, all of the clear memories that I retain seem to be of events that have taken place since my birth in the physical world. That event occurred in 1962. I have experienced several unexplainable spiritual events, just as I am sure most people have, but my understanding of things in the spirit realm are for the most part not based on personal experience, but only on the very limited information that I have picked up from outside sources, and in particular the Bible, which I have no problem saying is truly and without a doubt the Word of God. Unlike the spiritual teachings of my dad, nothing that I have ever read from the Bible has ever been proven inaccurate. If you watch enough of my Bible videos, it shouldn't take long for you to feel the same way. The first thing that needs to be understood is that the information about such things as heaven, hell, and the soul, although limited, is recorded using very precise terminology. I feel that probably the reason that is so is due to the fact that so many religions existed on the earth when the books of the Bible were written that God wanted to make sure that nobody would ever be able to use his Bible in such a way as to support the beliefs of those religions. In the earliest books of the Bible, all of those religions are referred to as Baal worship. Today, in none of those religions refer to their faiths by that ancient Hebrew word, but they are still here. Remnants of their beliefs, practices, and rituals have been preserved in the religions of the world, and even though many of those religions do not use the Bible to support their beliefs, many do. Primarily, the religions of Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Some only use corrupted bits and pieces loosely based on the Bible narrative, while others use only the first 2/3 of the Bible. Others use only the final 1/3, but there are others still that use the entire Bible, which, believe it or not, is actually a good thing. Had the Baals not preserved and produced such an abundance of Bibles, it is very unlikely that Bibles would be so easy to acquire. Even though our modern English translations of the Bible have been somewhat altered through the translation process, for the most part, they all still have the ability to teach the truth on the subjects that we're going to be talking about today. In fact, I don't see any way that a person reading an English Bible would ever be able to come up with any of the teachings of the Baals if all that they were using in their quest for truth were those English Bibles. It may shock you to hear just how much is written about such things as the soul, the spirit, and the condition of the dead. Certainly you will wonder about why your pastor, priest, rabbi, or televangelist never shared this information with you. One question that many people wonder about is, where were we before we were born? Genesis chapter 2 and verse 7 says, "And the Lord God formed of the dust, the man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." This rendering is from the King James Bible. The word translated here is nephesh, which means living being, and should always be consistently translated as soul or living being everywhere that it appears in the Old Testament. The Greek word translated throughout the New Testament as soul or living being is psyche. Linguists who have studied documents outside of the Bible containing these words agree that both words mean the same thing, and there is no reason to question what they say, because Paul confirmed that nephesh and psyche are just the same word from two different languages when he quoted this exact verse and used the word psyche in place of the word nephesh. At 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 45, Paul wrote, "And so it is written, the first man, Adam, was made a living soul." In both accounts, as they appear in our English Bibles, Adam is said to have become a living soul, not that a living soul was put into him. And in these verses, the churches have not done anything to alter the thought that is being communicated from the original manuscript. It only requires the most basic reasoning skills for us to come to the conclusion that if Adam became a living soul when he was created, then he wasn't a living soul before that time. Even though this particular rendering does nothing to mislead us about the nature of the soul, it has to be admitted that most of the churches do alter other Bible verses in order to make them comply with a couple of doctrines about the soul that are not supported by any of the original language documents. Many, if not all, of the religions of Christianity say that the thing that differentiates man from the so-called lower life forms on our planet is the fact that man has a soul, while other living things do not. If there is anything that makes animals different from man, other than the obvious things that we can observe here in the fleshly realm, the Bible makes no mention of it. I'm not saying that there is no difference. At 1 Corinthians, Paul clearly states that there is a difference. I'm simply pointing out that whatever difference exists between the spiritual nature of man and the spiritual nature of other life forms on this planet, God never made a point of recording what those differences were in His Word, at least not in any clearly defined way. That being the case, any belief about what spiritually differentiates a human from any other living thing is purely the product of religion, and it is no way defined by the Bible. If we keep in mind that the words that we translate as soul or living being are the Hebrew words nephesh and the Greek word psyche, then all that we have to do in order to expel any doctrinal myths associated with these words is look at other verses where these words occur and examine how they are used in those verses. At Genesis chapter 1 and verse 30, we're told, "To every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is a living soul, I have given every green herb." If you pick up an actual copy of the King James Bible and look at what is really there, you'll notice that I added a word that does not actually appear there. Although the King James uses the word soul where the word nephesh appears at Genesis chapter 2 verse 7, and also uses the word soul where the word psyche appears at 1 Corinthians 15:45, the translator simply chose to leave it out at Genesis chapter 1 and verse 30. There is no ancient document anywhere that would support such a rendering. The word nephesh is clearly present here in every ancient copy of Genesis that exists. Sadly, many versions of the English Bible follow the tradition begun hundreds of years ago of translating every appearance of the words nephesh and psyche as soul, living being, or some English equivalent if the verse is about a human. But where the verse is about anything other than a human, these words are usually translated in some other way, or as in this case, simply left out. The words that we translate as soul or living being are consistently used throughout all ancient texts of the Bible in exactly the same way, every time, irregardless of whether the soul is human or animal. The only reason that the churches use multiple words to translate this concept is to lend support to doctrinal teachings that are not supported by the Scriptures. The other false doctrinal belief in regard to the soul is the teaching that the soul is immortal. As often as we hear about the immortal soul from the altar or pulpit or stage, those two words never once appear together anywhere in any Bible that I have ever seen. That doesn't mean that nothing survives the death of the body, but since the word soul means living being, it only stands to reason that once a body has died, it would no longer meet the criteria of being a living being. The English word for dead being is corpse. Also within this scripture, we're given important information about the invisible part of humans that in most religions would go unnoticed. When the Bible says that God breathed into Adam's nostril the breath of life, what is actually recorded here in the ancient Hebrew language is God instilled into the man's face a living personality with emotions. In Hebrew, af, neshama, and che. This neshama would perhaps be more like our Western understanding of what a soul is, and in fact is sometimes translated as soul. One official belief of the Jewish faith is that the neshama is the soul, or spirit being that exists within a human. After reading what I think is every scripture containing this word, I'm not able to determine any clearly defined explanation of exactly what a neshama is. However, it appears that the neshama is unique to each individual. In other words, it's not simply some kind of shared energy from the Creator. Knowing that God put the neshama into Adam as he brought him to life does not reveal if the neshama existed as an individual prior to Adam's coming to life. After examining this Hebrew word and its uses, I am unable to determine any more details about the nature of the neshama than what I have already said. Placing the neshama into the man's af, or face, what is usually translated as nostril, says a lot as well. In every use of this word af, emotions are involved. Something else that we can be certain of is that neshama cannot possibly be air, or breathing, or breath. And the word af, that always involves the emotions of the face, cannot possibly be nostril. From the use of the word, I believe that the af would better be described as the brain, or the part of the brain that in Greek is called the metapon, the same word that is translated as forehead in the book of Revelation. The one word that the translators seem to always get right in this verse is che, which means or involves life. Another word that we can use to get a clearer understanding of the spiritual nature of man is spirit. The two words that we translate as spirit are ruach, which is the Hebrew or Old Testament word, and pneuma, which is the Greek or New Testament word. In most verses, this word seems to be the invisible life force of an individual, whether man, angel, or God. In other words, the spirit of a man is never spoken of in the Bible as a separate individual, but simply as an invisible part of an individual, whether that individual is a man, an angel, or God. Trinitarians would argue this point, but there really isn't any reason to believe that the use of the word would be different when speaking about one kind of living being and another kind of living being. In the Old Testament, the word that is translated as spirit when associated with humans is never anything more than the impersonal life force of the neshama. Unlike the words nephesh and psyche that I spoke about earlier, there are no direct correlations that we can make between the Hebrew word ruach and the Greek word pneuma. That doesn't mean that they are not the same word, but at least for the time being, I'm not aware of any New Testament writer quoting an Old Testament verse employing the word spirit. They may mean the same basic thing, but may not be interchangeable. It is not unusual for words that seem to mean the same thing in two different languages to actually have distinct nuances in one language that they do not have in another. In the New Testament, at Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 14, we are told that angels are spirits. The word used here is pneuma, which literally translates as invisible force and is where we get our English word pneumatic, as in our air-powered tools. This scripture clearly does not say that angels have a spirit, but instead that they are spirits, and the original Greek wording seems to support this. Since we know that angels have personalities, and that angels are said to be spirits, then we can assume that spirits, at least in the New Testament when associated with angels, have personalities. The first chapter, or the first part of chapter 12, of Ecclesiastes seems to be a very colorful description of the effects of old age, which concludes at verse 7 by saying, "And the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it." According to this verse, the physical elements that were taken from the earth in order to form our fleshly bodies will return to the earth, and our spirit that came from God in a similar fashion will return to God. Some religions believe that since the physical elements that we are made of don't retain any of the traits of the individual, the spirit in like manner retains none of the traits of the individual either. Many other religions believe just the opposite, that the spirit spoken of in the Bible retains all of the traits of the individual, even using this scripture as proof that humans go to heaven when they die. Much of the confusion between the different faiths is probably caused by those distinct nuances between the Hebrew and the Greek words ruach and pneuma that are translated as spirit. I'll speak in more detail about that in just a moment. Solomon gives us more information in chapter 9 of Ecclesiastes, which discusses in some detail the condition of the dead. Solomon starts by saying that it doesn't matter if you're good or bad because everybody faces the same fate. And at verse 5 he says, "For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, and even their name is forgotten. Their love and their hate and their jealousy have long since vanished. Never again will they have a part in anything that happens under the sun." This may sound depressing, since after all, Solomon is basically telling us that when you're dead, you're dead. In fact, he concluded at verse 7 by recommending that we all eat, drink, and be merry, since we are all going to die anyway. It wasn't until hundreds of years later that Paul addressed the writings of Solomon at 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and 32, where he disputes what Solomon wrote, forcefully declaring that there is going to be a resurrection, but also says that if there is no resurrection, then in fact we should all do what Solomon recommends, which is eat and drink, for tomorrow we will die. After exposing the false teaching of Solomon, Paul goes on to address several other false teachings about what happens to people after they die, all of which are still taught by the Baals. The first false religious belief that Paul addresses is the belief that people are reincarnated as animals when, from verse 38 to verse 40, he tells them very plainly that they won't be coming back as birds or fish or any other animal. If you take into consideration that the Bible condemned the sexual interaction that took place in the ancient world between humans and the fallen angels, then it would stand to reason that humans, being a distinct species from angels, would not come back as angels either. And Paul confirms this at verse 40, where he says that just as human bodies are not like animal bodies, heavenly bodies are not the same as earthly bodies. Many religions still teach that humans are reincarnated as animals when they die, and many others teach that people become angels when they die. Paul is simply explaining that both of these teachings are nothing more than two different versions of the same teaching, and that neither version is true. Paul then addresses the false teaching that a body is necessary in order for a person to be resurrected. It is obvious that people in the ancient world put a lot of emphasis on burial, and even today there are people who worry about what happens to their remains or the remains of their loved ones after death. At that time in Bible history, there had been quite a few resurrections of dead people, and in each and every occurrence, it is the actual dead body of those individuals that had come back to life. When Jesus resurrected the son of the widow of Nain, as recorded at Luke chapter 7, verses 11 through 17, he actually touched the dead body and caused it to come back to life. And when Lazarus was resurrected, he appeared at the entrance of his tomb, still wrapped in the cloth that they had buried him in. Paul himself resurrected a young man that had died after falling out of a third-story window, and at Acts chapter 20 and verse 10, it describes Paul as laying his body over the body of the dead man. As frightening as death is, it should be very easy to understand why people put so much effort into ensuring that their bodies are well preserved in preparation for burial. It would be very easy for simple human beings to come to the wrong conclusion that without a body to raise up, there might not be a resurrection. After all, every person that had ever been brought back to life came back in their original bodies. So Paul addressed this false belief about the resurrection as well, by explaining that once a body is dead, it doesn't matter what happens to it, because in the future resurrection, our old body won't be used. He described the process using the illustration of wheat. He says that you don't plant a dead wheat plant in order to get live wheat plants. You instead plant the seed and get a whole new plant. When you look at these verses as found at chapter 15 of 1 Corinthians, the wording may be confusing due to the misleading nature of the translation, but the point is not too hard to see once you understand what's going on here. Adam was created using nothing more than the dust of the ground, which had never been a human body prior to its existence as dust. Paul was simply pointing out that God can do the same thing as many times as necessary in order to produce as many bodies as necessary in the future resurrection. From verse 42 to 44, Paul explains that just like the wheat that does not come from dead wheat, but from seed, the bodies that we get in the future resurrection will not be created from our dead bodies, but from the seed. That seed being the spirit body, which goes back to God at the death of the physical body. That very same neshama and ruach that had been placed in Adam at his creation. In most English translations of these verses, it says that where there is a physical body, there is also a spirit body. It is easy to be confused about what Paul is trying to communicate here, because by tradition, the churches love to use these verses in support of the belief that the final goal of a man is to become a spirit in heaven. In John chapter 3 and verse 13, Jesus said that no one had ever been to heaven except for the one that came from heaven, meaning Jesus himself. Many churches teach that Jesus only said that because people didn't start going to heaven till later, but scripturally there is absolutely nothing anywhere in the original language text of the Bible to support such an assumption. Once again, all that we can learn from the scriptures is what is said in the scriptures. The belief that this verse is about human spirits going to heaven is based on the belief that God only exists in heaven, which is nothing more than another false doctrinal teaching of some religions. According to Psalms chapter 139, beginning at verse 7, the Bible has this to say: "Whither shall I go from thy spirit? Whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there." The writer of this verse is not asserting that fleshly humans have the ability to go to heaven, but only that if he could go to heaven, God would be there. And in like manner, he's not asserting that fleshly humans have the ability to go to hell, but if he could go to hell, God would be there as well. This version is as it appears in the King James Bible. The word that is translated as hell here is Sheol. In many religions, there is a doctrinal belief that Sheol or hell is a place of eternal torment. But this verse is as it was originally written, would have been in the ancient Hebrew language. In that language, the word Sheol never means anything more than realm of the dead. Many religions, not wanting to associate their gods with hell, simply translate this occurrence of the word Sheol as grave or depths. But this conceals that when a man dies, good or bad, his spirit returns to God, who exists not only in heaven, but also in Sheol, the realm of the dead. Confirming that Sheol is in fact the realm of the dead are the words of Psalm 16:10. For you will not abandon my soul in Sheol, or let your Holy One see corruption. Later, at Acts chapter 2 and verse 27, Peter quoted this verse saying, For David says concerning him, For you will not abandon my soul to Hades, or let your Holy One see corruption. There is no denying that Acts chapter 2 and verse 27 is a direct quote of Psalms chapter 16 and verse 10. Only instead of using the Hebrew word Sheol, it uses the Greek word Hades, meaning that both the Hebrew word Sheol and the Greek word Hades are interchangeable. In the ancient Greek language, the word Hades, just like the word Sheol, always means realm of the dead, nothing else. These two verses are also another good example of a direct quote proving that the words nephesh and psyche, both meaning soul or living being, are interchangeable as well. The truth always conforms to reality, which is why the Bible always conforms to itself. There is never any need to come up with any kind of explanation about why the truth is the truth. Jesus said that no one had ever been to heaven because no one had ever been to heaven. He didn't say that no one had been to heaven yet. And after Jesus' death and resurrection, nothing was ever written to lead us to believe that anything had changed. There are scriptures that speak of human beings entering into the kingdom of heaven. But since the physical location of the earth is within the space that is part of the spiritual realm referred to as heaven, there really isn't any conflict between the idea of entering into the kingdom of heaven while remaining here on the earth. In chapter 6 of Matthew, while teaching the crowds, Jesus tells his listeners how to pray. In what has come to be known as the Lord's Prayer, Jesus explains that his listeners should ask God to let your kingdom come, let your will be done on earth as in heaven. This scripture clearly defines a distinction between the kingdom of heaven, which would one day rule over the earth, and the system of rulership that existed at that time, and in fact has continued to this day. We can logically conclude that if Jesus was telling his listeners to pray for that kingdom to come, that it was still a yet future event. It is also logical to conclude that since conditions have not changed since chapter 6 of Matthew was written, that it is still appropriate for us to pray for God's kingdom, the kingdom of heaven that is as yet to come. The theme of the Bible is the war between God's kingdom and Satan's empire. It is a fact that throughout the Bible, the establishment of God's kingdom on earth is spoken of many times as an absolute certainty. When that event takes place, it will be possible to say that mankind has entered into the kingdom of heaven. If we look at every scripture using the phrase kingdom of heaven, it quickly becomes obvious that most of those scriptures, if not all, are about the physical realm of our planet or the physical realm of our solar system, not the spiritual realm that is simply referred to as heaven. The Bible always makes a clear distinction between heaven and the kingdom of heaven. Quite a few religions say that Elijah and Enoch somehow did go to heaven in their fleshly bodies, but those teachings are not supported in any way by the Bible. When you read the accounts, it does seem as if the possibility exists, but that possibility quickly goes away when the original language documents are examined under closer scrutiny, and especially when you take into consideration that fleshly beings cannot enter into the spirit realm, as 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 50 clearly states. All religions are based on lies that are not supported by the scriptures. The religions that teach that Elijah and Enoch went to heaven before Jesus went to heaven, in many cases, are the same religions that teach that no one went to heaven before Jesus went to heaven. Another false teaching about the resurrection was that those who were resurrected would one day die again. After all, everyone who had ever been resurrected evidently did, or at the very least were in the process of dying. If alive, Lazarus, the widow's son, and Eutychus would have aged. We don't know how much time had passed, but it would have been sufficient for people reading what we now refer to as 1 Corinthians to have observed that those who had previously been resurrected were not immortal. Also, there were other resurrections recorded in the Old Testament, and those people no longer seemed to be among the living. Even the people that had performed those resurrections were no longer around. From verses 50 to 54, Paul addresses this false belief about the resurrection by explaining that unlike those who had previously been resurrected, those who would eventually experience the yet future resurrection would never have to experience such things as sickness, old age, or death again. He also explained that anyone that lived long enough to witness the resurrection would be transformed back into healthy young people on that day without ever having to experience death at all. At 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 17, Paul wrote, "Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord." In this verse, the churches have intentionally mistranslated three words in order to make it appear as if humans will go up into the sky. The first word, clouds, plural, should be the word cloud, singular. This word, although used in several verses about the clouds that we see in the sky, is more often used in the Bible to describe the cloud that filled the temple, or the cloud that covered Moses and the nation of Israel as they walked through the Red Sea on dry ground. It is the same cloud that engulfed Peter, James, and John when they witnessed the Transfiguration. It is the same cloud spoken of in Revelation that will engulf the earth at Armageddon. In all of these verses, it is obvious that this cloud is not the clouds that we can see up in the sky. It simply would not make sense for so many historic spiritual events to take place at ground level in the cloud, and then to have the single most important spiritual event in all of human history to take place up in the sky in a rain cloud. We can confirm that this cloud is at ground level by looking at another word in this verse, which is translated as in the air. In Greek, the word that we translate as air, believe it or not, is actually the Greek word air. This word in Greek does not mean up in the sky, but simply means in the air, as opposed to in the ground. In fact, this word isn't at all about elevation, but it is used to distinguish the air at ground level from what we think of as the sky. The final word that is intentionally mistranslated by the churches is harpazo, which in the King James Bible is translated as caught up. If we look at other verses in the Bible that use this word, it becomes apparent that this word cannot possibly be used as caught up in the majority of places where it is used. However, the word seized seems to work in every single instance where this word appears, and in fact, in many verses which contain the Greek word harpazo, the translators use the word seized because no other word will work. If we properly translate this verse along with the previous verse, using words that are appropriate, we get something that sounds a whole lot more like this. "For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be seized along with them in the cloud to meet the Lord out in the open. And so we will always be with the Lord." These verses cannot accurately be translated in any way to be about people going up into the sky. It is simply saying that those of us who are still alive when the resurrection begins will witness Jesus coming down from heaven as the dead are coming up from the ground and out into the open. It may not sound anything like what we have been led to believe, but this is, for a fact, what is actually recorded in the Scriptures, and is going to be the most wonderful event in human history. When it takes place, all of us will instantly be transformed, not into angels, but as Paul says, into humans. Real humans, not the kind of humans that we are now, but humans as humans were intended to be, with the ability to never get sick, never grow old, and never die. As is recorded in 1 Corinthians 15:52, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, as the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. Obviously, none of us are like this now. From the time that we are conceived, we are in a dying state, something substantially different from what Paul is describing. He does not give any kind of so-called scientific or biological explanation as to how our bodies will change, only that we will go from corruption to incorruption, which could mean anything at this point. None of us has ever experienced being incorruptible. It would be wrong to assume that we turn into some kind of ghost or spirit or disembodied soul. When Adam and Eve sinned, humanity did not go from a life expectancy of eternity to a life expectancy of 70 or 80 years. It was a slow, long process of steadily decreasing lifespans. Methuselah did not live 969 years because he was some kind of spirit. Had our first parents never been disobedient to natural law, Methuselah would still be alive in his original young, healthy, fleshly body today. The word that is always translated as resurrection is anastasis, which simply means to rise up. At Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 35, Paul uses this word when describing the resurrections that had happened in the past, meaning that the past resurrections and the future resurrections are all the same thing. Paul said, women receive back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might be resurrected to a better life. It's believed by many that they would be resurrected to a better life because they would be in heaven. But once again, there is nothing in this verse to indicate that a resurrected person would be changed in anything substantially different from what they would have been prior to their deaths. When Jesus asked Mary if she believed that Lazarus could be resurrected, she replied that she knew he would be resurrected in the last day. Jesus responded by saying, I am the resurrection. In other words, Jesus was telling Mary that as the one that would one day resurrect everyone that had ever lived, it would not be a big thing for him to resurrect one person right then and there. After crying over the sadness that he felt over the loss of his friend, Jesus brought Lazarus back to life. Jesus made a direct correlation between what he did to Lazarus that day and what he would do to Lazarus on the last day. Since Lazarus came out of the tomb wrapped in burial cloth, it's very obvious that he came back to life on earth in his fleshly human body. The Scriptures, as they are written, do not record anything that would make us believe that Lazarus would have a different experience the second time around. From the death of Abel to our day, thousands of years have passed and millions of other people have died. We have to wonder about where those people are and what they are doing. There isn't very much to go by, but what is written is sufficient for us to at least get a pretty good idea. What Solomon said about the dead being unconscious may be correct. It may not be permanent, but for right now, it would at least to some extent seem that the dead, at least in the physical realm, are not overtly active. Many people around the world willingly testify to having seen ghosts, but since I have never seen one, I'm at least for the time being not forming any kind of opinion one way or another, but have to admit that scripturally the possibility does exist. When King Saul was fleeing for his life, he sought help from a woman that is known in popular culture as the Witch of Endor. In the Bible, she is referred to by two Hebrew words seemingly related. One of those words, aub, means container. This word is used to indicate that she, like many other people in the Bible who are described as containers, share her body with the spirit of some other being. The other word, Yehonai, means someone with the ability to communicate with beings in the spirit realm. I have spoken with several religionists about these verses and have been told that the woman was only pretending that she could speak with the spirits, or that the spirits that she was able to summon were demons, pretending to be Samuel. But there can be no allowance for such an understanding, as the account is recorded in the Bible. In these verses, the Bible clearly says that she is actually able to summon Samuel, who had been dead for quite some time. And although the account is very brief, it does seem to support that Samuel was at least to some extent resting. At 1 Samuel chapter 28 and verse 15, Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Or more literally, "Why have you shaken me and caused me to come up?" It could be said that Samuel was asleep in death at the time, and that way that the verse is worded in English, at least to some extent, seems to support that assumption. But as recorded in the more ancient text from which our English versions are translated, the wording doesn't support any clearly defined understanding about Samuel's condition prior to being summoned. The remainder of the account confirms that indeed the person speaking to Saul actually was Samuel, and as recorded in the account of the short conversation, seems to present Samuel as being awake and aware of his surroundings, and from the questions he asked, it seems very obvious to me that he was also aware of his surroundings prior to his entering into this fleshly realm. But with what little we have to go by here, it would be wrong to draw any conclusions about how much he knew, or for how long of a period of time. He could have just figured it out on his way up out of the ground. Once when I passed out, the first thing that I said when I came out of it was, "Where am I?" A doctor at the time explained to me that whenever someone loses consciousness in one location and is revived in another location, they always ask that same exact question, "Where am I?" It's an instinctive response to what a person would perceive as being instantaneously transported from one location to another. Unconscious people don't have the ability to perceive the passing of time. I'm not saying that Samuel was conscious for the entire time that he was in the realm of the dead, but the evidence seems to at least support the possibility that he was. In fact, it seems quite probable that he was. In this account, Samuel didn't say, "Where am I?" or anything that would lead us to believe that he had just been revived from an unconscious state in a strange location. But there is nothing in this account confirming that every single thing that Samuel said was recorded. When asked what she saw, the witch of Endor said that she saw one of the gods coming up out of the ground. So Samuel didn't just instantaneously appear, but actually did physically travel from some other location on his journey into the realm of the living. Referring to Samuel as one of the gods should not be used as evidence that this was a demon or fallen angel, or even one of the righteous angels. In the Bible, even powerful humans are spoken of as gods. From this account, some things seem to be quite obvious. For one, Samuel retained his basic appearance. Also, it is obvious that he retained accurate memories. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to remind Saul of the things that he had told him while he was still alive. This information may not be that big of a deal to many of you watching this video, but I have been asked by quite a few people if after the resurrection we would be able to remember our past lives. The fact that Samuel retained his memories would be a good indication that the same will be true for us as well. In fact, quite a few scriptures speak of our current experiences here in this world ruled by men and angels as a learning experience. There would be no point in learning if at death we were to forget everything that we had learned. At another event that we spoke of briefly a few minutes ago, known as the Transfiguration, James, Peter, and John witnessed Jesus speaking with Elijah and Moses, both of whom had been dead for hundreds of years. Nothing that Moses or Elijah said on this occasion was recorded for us in the Bible, but once again, the account seems to confirm that these two men retained at least some visible characteristic that led James, Peter, and John to come to the conclusion that these men were actually Moses and Elijah. The fact that Jesus spoke with them is a good indication that they, like Samuel, retained their memories, were aware of and understood where they were and where they had been. and were able to hold a pertinent conversation about something that Jesus wanted to know, or something that Jesus wanted them to know. A big clue about the nature of the dead can be found at 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 19. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared. I understand that many religionists teach that these spirits that Jesus proclaimed to in prison are supposed to be dead human beings in hell. But there isn't anything in these scriptures related to the Greek word Hades, which the religions associate with hell. Plus, there is nothing anywhere in the Bible to indicate that God makes any kind of distinction between human beings that died in the flood and human beings that died at any other time in human history. If Jesus was to preach to people in the realm of the dead, he would logically preach to all of them, not just the wicked ones, and certainly not just the ones that had died in the flood. At 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 4, Peter spoke of these imprisoned spirits a second time, saying, For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell, and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials, and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment. This series of scriptures begins by speaking of the flood of Noah's day, and near the end addresses the destruction of Sodom in Lot's day. In the first incident, Peter says that the angels that sinned before the flood were imprisoned in hell. But once again, in the original text, the word that the churches translate as hell, Hades, which means the realm of dead humans, is not anywhere to be found in this or any of the surrounding scriptures. The ancient Greek word that is translated as hell here is Tartarus. And just as the word Hades in the Greek language always means the realm of dead humans, the word Tartarus in that same ancient language always means the prison of the gods. The people that God used to write down the words of the Bible did not use those words in some unique way that is only found in the Bible. They used them just as the ancient Greek peoples used them. Tartarus was a very common word in ancient Greek literature, just like the word Hades. Someone reading the book of 2 Peter 1900 years ago would have read through this passage, instantly understanding that they had just read about the prison of the gods, and would have never even considered the possibility that this passage was about a place for humans, or even a place of fire and torment. Even though the Bible contains references to the wicked angels being imprisoned, there is not a single passage referring to the realm of dead humans, Sheol or Hades, as a prison. There is also nothing anywhere in the Bible about Jesus going down into Hades, the realm of the dead, to proclaim anything to the humans that were there. Possibly, when Jesus was speaking to Elijah and Moses, he instructed them to do so. As God's spokesmen on earth in their previous lives, it would only make sense that they would be able to handle the task of being God's spokesmen again in Hades. In chapter 37 of Genesis, there is a story about Joseph's brothers selling him into slavery. In order to cover up what they did, they made up a story about him being killed by wild animals. When Jacob heard the story, he went into a deep depression. And at verse 35, it is recorded that all his sons and daughters came to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted. No, he said, I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave. So his father wept for him. The actual word that is used here is once again Sheol, which means realm of the dead, but which is usually translated as hell in verses where the churches need there to be a hell. However, since Joseph and Jacob were both good men, no translator wants to translate this verse using the word hell. So instead, they simply substitute the word grave and hope that no one catches on. There really isn't anything that we can determine from this scripture about what Jacob expected to experience in the realm of the dead. All that we can be sure of is that he was confident that he would rejoin his son, Joseph. Whether he expected to interact with his son or simply join him in some kind of unconscious state is not recorded. For a very long time, I just knew that everyone in Sheol was unconscious and unaware of their surroundings and thought that I had scriptural backing from verses like the ones that I am quoting in this video. But I was obviously very wrong, and in a moment you will understand why. The verse in Ecclesiastes about the dead being unconscious was spoken of by Paul as if it was a human belief and not a teaching from God. Many of the words of Solomon are refuted by other Bible writers, and even the words that the Bible uses to describe the teachings of Solomon, such as proverb and wisdom, although sounding righteous as recorded in English, are translated from words that are not good words at all. Hopefully, I'll get around to addressing the words of Solomon in greater detail at some time in the future. Just understand, Solomon's teachings about the condition of the dead are not dependable. In the parts of the Bible that are about the pre-flood world, the angels are always spoken of as if they are physical, fleshly beings, able to interact with humans in a physical, fleshly way, even indulging in sexual activity. After the flood, the only angels spoken of as if they are physically interacting with humans are the righteous angels that visited Abraham, shared in a rather elaborate meal with him, and brought destruction upon Sodom and the other wicked cities of the promised land. After those two events, every reference to any angel is always as a spirit, either in vision or in some instances sharing the fleshly body of some fleshly being in a condition popularly known as possession. Prior to the flood, the angels are never called spirits. It is only after the flood that they are described in such a way. All of the evidence draws us to the conclusion that prior to the flood, the fallen angels, just like us, existed in fleshly bodies. After the flood, it seems that the fallen angels only existed as spirits. That being the case, we can assume that all of the fallen angels that came to the earth prior to the flood were in fact killed by the flood. This would explain why Peter would specifically refer to those that sinned before the flood as the only ones that Jesus spoke to in Tartarus. Nearly all of Revelation is about the angels, so we can get a pretty good idea of what they have done in the past and what fate awaits them in the future from reading that book. Even though Solomon's words are often misleading, no Bible writer disputes the fact that at death a person's spirit goes out. One verse that supports this concept is found in chapter 8 of Luke, which records another occasion in which Jesus resurrects a young girl that is the daughter of a man named Jairus. Upon coming back to life, at chapter 8 and verse 55, it says, "Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up." James chapter 2 and verse 26 in like manner confirms that the body without the spirit is dead. No body that Jesus or his disciples rescued from demon possession ever died from the experience, meaning that the spirits that keep a person's fleshly body alive are something separate from the spirits that would be in a person that is possessed. All of us are aware of the scriptures about demon possession. Many of these scriptures, as they appear in English, make it seem as if a demon or fallen angel has the power to completely take over a person against their will. But according to Jesus, there are things that we can do to protect ourselves. In Luke chapter 21, beginning in verse 14 and continuing all the way down to verse 26, Jesus speaks about defending our house and how a strong man can be conquered by a stronger man. And then speaks about how if an unclean spirit is driven out but is unable to find another person to possess, it will return to the person that was driven out of. But if an unclean spirit returns to find a person occupied by a clean spirit, the unclean spirit will not return. This clean spirit may be one of the righteous angels, but as is recorded here, it could actually be the person's own spirit. If we think about what Jesus is saying here, we can come to several conclusions that are not in conflict with any other verses on this subject. First, what we are used to calling demon possession would more accurately be referred to as a cohabitation of a fleshly human body between a human spirit and the spirit of one of the fallen angels. Second, if a person can share his body with an unclean spirit, they can also do so with a clean spirit. But third, and probably more important for our discussion, is the fact that a person can exist without the spirit of any angel occupying their body whatsoever. Knowing that the angels who came to earth prior to the flood are all in Tartarus now does not mean that humans cannot be possessed. There's simply not enough information recorded in the Bible to make any kind of definitive statement concerning how all of that works. In the future, I may make a video just about that subject, but have found that until I have all of my facts straight, as well as the scriptures to back them up, it's simply best for me to keep quiet and go about the business of making videos about subjects of which I have a better understanding. The words that we translate as angel in both the Hebrew and Greek language mean messenger. It is only logical to conclude that these messengers would be involved in transporting information from one location or individual to another location or individual. If the messenger entered a person and refused to leave, or if the message being delivered by that angel was false, it would be logical to conclude that such a messenger would be considered a wicked angel. All through the Bible there are verses about filling and emptying containers, cups, pitchers, water jars, even horns, which would have been hollowed out and have a cap fitted to hold things such as spices, makeup, and oil. These stories are often about cleaning containers. When Jesus confronted the Pharisees, he told them that it was more important to clean the inside of the container than to clean the outside. He said this because the Pharisees had a reputation of appearing very clean on the outside, while on the inside being very wicked. Jesus called them the offspring of vipers, a title that technically could have been used before the flood to describe someone that was genetically half human and half angel, or, as in the case of the religious leaders of Jesus' day, a wicked human sharing his body with a wicked spirit. People such as religious leaders, political leaders, and economic leaders are often spoken of throughout the Bible as if they are cups, horns, vessels, or any other number of words related to items that in the ancient world would have been used as containers. It is in each instance that they are spoken of as such due to the fact that their bodies were being used to contain or house one of the unclean spirits. Throughout the New Testament, all kinds of strange, out of the ordinary things are blamed on the demons, including such things as an inability to speak or hear. One group of demons, going by the name of Legion, caused a man to be exceedingly violent. In the book of Acts, a woman was said to have a demon that allowed her to foretell future events. What is actually recorded in this account in the Greek language is that she echo pneuma python. Echo meaning clothed, filled, combined with, or married to. Pneuma meaning spirit, and python meaning serpent god. So according to the original language text of this verse, this woman was filled with the spirit of a serpent god. In our modern English language, an echo is still a second voice. The book of Malachi was given to the nation of Israel as a reminder of all the bad things that they did to God in repayment for all of the good things that God had done for them. Near the end of the book it says at chapter 4 and verse 5, "In the final days I will send Elijah the prophet." The problem with that statement is that Elijah had already been dead for a long time. So when Jesus was on earth, his disciples asked him about this. Jesus' response was that John the Baptist was Elijah. There are a couple of ways that we can interpret this. The first and most obvious way would be to simply accept that the man that the disciples knew as John was the same man that had lived hundreds of years earlier, known as Elijah. After all, the Bible does not record any details about Elijah's death, and quite a few people believe that he actually never died. But the Bible very clearly describes the details of John's birth, meaning that John could not possibly be the same fleshly person as Elijah. But even if Elijah was dead, God certainly would have the ability to bring Elijah's spirit out of Sheol and place it into John. But when asked by the religious leaders of the day if he was Elijah, John said no. Putting all of this together in a way that makes any kind of sense is possible, but we have to be willing to accept that a person can share his body with another spirit. A very good key to unlocking the mystery of these scriptures is the understanding that all angels are angels. Good angels are angels, and bad angels are angels. Just as good and bad people are just people, good and bad angels are all just angels. That being the case, it is not unreasonable to believe that all angels have the same abilities. Since we know that bad angels or demons can possess living beings, then it is only logical to conclude that good angels can do the same thing. In fact, it seems that this was in fact the case with John the Baptist. In Matthew chapter 11 and verse 10, speaking of John, Jesus said, "This is he of whom it is written, Behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you." The word that is translated here as messenger is actually angelos, which is the word that would normally be translated as angel. Understanding that Jesus also told his disciples that John was Elijah, it is only logical to conclude that the angel that had one time shared Elijah's body was the same angel that in the first century shared John's body. The scripture at Matthew chapter 11 and verse 10 is a direct quote of the final verses of the book of Malachi. Every religion that I have ever been involved in says that the book of Malachi was written by a prophet by that name, but that doesn't really sound reasonable since there is not a single person in the entire Bible named Malachi. Add to that the fact that the word Malachi is an actual word in that ancient language, which means my angel or my angels, and it suddenly makes much more sense to understand that the book of Malachi is actually the book of my angel or the book of my angels. Once again, it is only logical to conclude that when the book of God's angels says that Elijah would come in the last day, it is very likely that this Elijah is actually Elijah's angel, hence the name of the book. Referring to this being specifically as Elijah's angel is not presumptuous on my part. In the New Testament, this concept is clearly defined by other verses. In chapter 12 of Acts, there is an account of Peter being led out of prison by his angel, and it is obvious from the verses that Peter's friends recognize that Peter has an angel. After arriving at a friend's house, a woman named Rhoda hears Peter's voice at the door asking to come in. Not believing that Peter could have gotten out of prison, the men of the house tell her at verse 15, it must be his angel. And in the ancient Greek language, the word rendered here as his is autos, which actually does translate as his. From all of the information that I have discussed at this time, this is what we can know for certain. Our spirit comes from God, who has existed forever. Hence, it would be technically correct to say that we ourselves have existed forever. The Bible says nothing about our existence with God prior to being born on earth. To say that we were or were not individuals prior to our birth would be a religious belief. The Bible only says that our spirit comes from God. Understanding that nothing is recorded in the Bible to indicate what our spirit might have experienced prior to our birth, if anything, means that it's not something that we need to know, at least not at this time. The words that are normally translated as soul or living being in our Bibles are nephesh and psyche. The Bible says that Adam became a soul or living being at his creation. We can assume that this is true of all of us, and hence whatever we were before our birth, it would not have been a nephesh or psyche, what we call a soul. The two Hebrew words, neshama and ruach, when examined closely in our concordances and lexicons, describe two different aspects of the invisible part of an individual. In our English Bibles, the word neshama is usually translated as breath of life or occasionally as soul. The word ruach is translated as spirit. The breath of life seems to actually be the invisible part of a person that retains all of our memories as well as our individual personalities, while the spirit seems to be the life force of an individual, which does not retain the memories or personality of the individual. The word spirit, or ruach, is used to describe the invisible, impersonal force of anyone, whether that individual is a human, angel, or even if it is the ruach, or spirit of the Creator himself. In the Greek portion of the Bible, the word pneuma is translated as spirit and seems to incorporate both the concept of the neshama and the ruach from the Hebrew portion of the Bible, whether angel or human or God. That means that the spirits mentioned in the New Testament are the actual person combined with the life force. In the New Testament, the spirit is not an impersonal force. After death, while awaiting the resurrection, we are without a doubt still viable, living individuals that actually exist in the spirit realm, which in Hebrew is Sheol and in Greek is Hades. Both words in their original languages mean realm of the dead. Neither word, as used in the Bible narrative or in sources outside of the Bible, ever means a place only reserved for bad people, and neither word means a place where the dead are tormented. If anything, it is a restful place. When Samuel's spirit was called out, the first thing that he said is, "Why have you disturbed me?" Neither Sheol nor Hades is ever spoken of within the Bible narrative as a final resting place, but simply as the realm occupied by the dead. In the verses that we spoke of earlier, Paul said that if there was no resurrection, then we should all just eat and drink, indicating that the realm of the dead, no matter how restful it is not as desirable as being resurrected here onto the earth. The Bible also says that this current situation is only temporary. At Revelation chapter 20, verses 13 through 15, we are told that after the earth is completely restored, death and Hades will be thrown into the lake of fire, along with anyone wicked enough to attempt another rebellion against God's natural law. According to this scripture, those individuals will experience death a second time. In Matthew chapter 22 and verse 29, some Pharisees who errantly believed that the law of Moses was forever, approached Jesus with a question about how that law would be applied after the resurrections. Jesus' response was, "You are wrong, because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God, for in the resurrection there will be no such thing as marriage." Then Jesus gives us further details about the condition of those that we think of as dead. "And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said? I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living." If according to Jesus, those men were still alive, then there is no doubt that something unique to the individual survives the death of the body. So far, I still haven't read a single verse describing what the dead experience while in Sheol. It may seem at this point as if the Bible reveals nothing more about this subject. However, nothing could be further from the truth. At Job chapter 3 and verse 13, Job described what would happen to him at death. "I would be asleep and at rest." At John chapter 11 and verse 11, when Lazarus died, Jesus said, "Lazarus has fallen asleep." At 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 15, Paul calls the dead those who have fallen asleep. Throughout the Bible, the dead are consistently spoken of as those who sleep. This is not a metaphor. There is absolutely no distinction made in the Bible between the sleep of the living and the sleep experienced by the dead. These scriptures are used by one of my former religions to explain that while awaiting the resurrection, the dead are unconscious, inactive, and unaware of their surroundings. That religion teaches just what Solomon taught, that the dead are dead. But if we look at the scriptures that speak of death as if it is sleep, we will often find detailed information from those Bible writers about what happens during sleep. And contrary to popular belief, the sleep of the dead, just like the sleep of the living at that time, could never be described as being unconscious, inactive, or unaware of surroundings. Daniel chapter 12 and verse 2 is one of the scriptures that refers to the dead as those who sleep. But throughout the book of Daniel, there are also extensive records of what Daniel experienced while he was sleeping. While sleeping, Daniel saw God take action in the days before the flood. He saw Alexander the Great conquer the world. He saw the Medes and the Persians conquer Babylon and free his people. He witnessed 4,000 years of conflict between the East and the West over control of the area known as the Promised Land. He could pray to God for answers to questions that he had, and in his sleep he would get his answers. Once, when Nebuchadnezzar, the ruler of Babylon, had a nightmare, Daniel asked God for guidance, and that night he had the same dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, along with an explanation of what that dream meant. When Daniel referred to the dead as those that sleep, he was giving us much more information than the churches want us to know. Several scriptures promise that in the last days many will have dreams similar to those that Daniel had. There is no scientific explanation given in the Bible as to why those kinds of dreams seem to have diminished, but there can be no denying that thousands of years ago the Bible recorded the dreams of many people, and in each and every one of those dreams, those who experienced them witnessed events that had occurred in the past, current events, and events that would take place in the future. They spoke with angels, and they spoke with God. Understanding the condition of the dead might lead someone to believe that being dead is better than being alive, and as things are right now, that might be true. But after the resurrection, that won't be true at all. The dead won't be giving up any kind of special insight when they return to the realm of the living. At night, they will still be able to have clear, trustworthy dreams, as will we. But after the night passes and we awaken, we, along with our resurrected loved ones, will actually be able to utilize the information communicated to us in our dreams, just as is promised by scriptures such as Acts chapter 2 and verse 17 and Joel chapter 2 and verse 28. Such abilities will no longer be reserved just for men such as Daniel, but will be experienced by all. Since most of the writers of the books of the Bible spoke of their sleep as a time of communication with the Creator and spoke of the dead as if they were sleeping, it's only logical to conclude that those who are asleep in death are fully aware of everything that is going on. They undoubtedly know more about the world around us than us. Our God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. He is our God. He is the God of all of our loved ones that have entered into the realm of the dead. Should we happen to enter that realm before the final trumpet, before the resurrection, He will still be our God. And through His Son, He will one day return us to the realm of the living. Not as it is now, but completely restored with none of the demons present to make living in this world such a chore. If you don't want to survive, don't listen to me.